Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Kuestenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, today I'd like to spend some time talking about retirement, Simon, because hopefully we're all going to get to that stage in our life sooner rather than later. And you've written a little bit about it. Now, for those listening or watching who are not reaching retirement age anytime soon, look, please keep listening, because even though this may not affect you for years to come, it probably will affect your parents, your grandparents, and it'll definitely affect somebody you know or you sometime in the future. Something we all aspire to, I guess, Simon.
It's a big hope. I'm 41, so this is definitely still a couple of years away. But it's important to understand this, what retirement is, what retirement can mean. And this is, of course, very broad stages that we talk about. But it is quite fascinating in research how predictable people live through those stages.
Yes, having seen a few friends and people close to me go through that, I've seen that as well. There's been a lot written and spoken about the financial side of retirement, Simon, but you recently wrote an article in the New Daily suggesting that if you're not prepared emotionally and socially, forget financially, and you suggested many baby boomers aren't ready, then retirement could be a pretty bumpy ride, Simon.
Exactly, and I would argue we now have still a wave of baby boomers entering retirement where this might be particularly strong, the dark sides of retirement, so to speak, because we still have a lot of men retiring in particularly who had a lot of their self-confidence, a lot of their social network, a lot of the stories that they tell themselves about themselves bound into their work persona. And then you suddenly take the work persona away, and it's not all that much left. And you really need to reinvent who you are at an advanced age at this point.
Definitely. Well, maybe you could start by giving us an overview of the 4 phases of retirement that you outlined in your article in the New Daily, and why it's important for, I guess, us individuals to understand it, but maybe even policymakers and bosses to understand these.
Policymaker, bosses, I would even go as far as saying super funds need to be really aware of this. Financial advisors, people who deal with people that move into retirement. If you can even give them a little heads up about what's coming, you can well and truly do a lot of good work. So, of course, retirement starts with a bang. It starts with a wonderful phase of retirement that is referred to as the holiday phase, the vacation phase, sometimes the honeymoon phase of retirement. You love it. Finally, the routine of a 9 to 5 breaks away. You go to bed when you want. You get up when you want. You drink during the week. Whatever. Daytime drinking is back. This is like the old college or university days reimagined. This is great stuff. Golf course, travel, an absolute lack of structure. You do what you want. You fulfill all those dreams that you might have postponed until retirement. That's wonderful. And if you can live like this for your 20 years in retirement, 30 years in retirement, good on you. But quite often it doesn't work out this way. Quite often you go into the next of the 4 phases of retirement, and that happens to be actually a rather severe phase. This phase is called feeling lost, because all of a sudden what you enjoyed previously, the lack of daily structure, the lack of a routine, that hurts you. There is a certain kind of need in our collective human experience where we want to know our place in the world. We know what to do. And in the feeling lost phase, lots and lots of bad things spike. This is when we see mental health decline quite rapidly. This is when we see suicide spike. This is when we just see people just hang out at home lost. They don't know what to do, and you really don't know, is there more in life for me? You know that you still have 10, 20, 30 years to live, and there's nothing there. And it's quite easy to understand how draining this can be for people, also on relationships. Because if one partner feels this way, it is very, very easy for this to impact the relationship, or for people to confuse this phase of being lost in retirement with having a horrible partner and then getting divorced. This is also the phase when divorces spike.
Really?
Very, very much so. It makes sense. You're feeling unhappy. You hang out with this one other person. It's all their fault. It's easier than looking inwards and understanding your broader conceptual changes in your life stage. And that's quite hard. It's a really, really hard phase. And the phase, if things go badly, it can break you. And I think the stage model is particularly here important to understand because it gives us an understanding that this is a stage, that this is not a permanent shift in your existence, but this is a stage that you can go through, and if you are guided through it by a bit of a helping hand, this can be your partner, this can be a friend who lived through this before you. So always make sure that you have older and younger friends as well, so you can see the world from multiple perspectives there. And if you live through this, you have to reinvent yourself. And you understand this. And the next phase there is the trial and error phase, where you really need to, I would say you need to throw a lot of things at the wall to find out who you are. Volunteer, go back to work, maybe finally pick up a new hobby, a long forgotten passion or desire that you have, and unravel that again and find yourself in it. Quite often this phase involves stepping out there again and dealing with other humans, finding your place in the world anew. Not easy. And you see that there's a lot of teenage angst that gets recycled. Again, this is the idea, where do I fit in? What is my place in life? And these big quintessential teenage questions you have to answer again in your 70s. Not easy.
And then there's the last phase.
Exactly, and there's the hope that once you actually successfully in the trial and error phase found things that fulfill you, a sense of volunteering, a way that you fit into the broader family structure of taking care of the grandkids, for example, or maybe it is just coming to peace with you live a nice and quiet life. Whatever it is, once you manage to actually reinvent yourself and rediscovered the place that you sit in the world quite nicely and safely, you can actually then enjoy your retirement to the fullest extent, and that is well and truly a wonderful experience. And I of course hope that as a country push as many people as possible to this wonderful fourth stage of retirement, because I do see mental health data that suggests, and economic data that suggests to me, that we'll have a growing number of retirees getting stuck in the feeling lost phase. And of course, you mentioned financial aspects of retirement at the beginning a bit, Michael. If you don't have the money to do this, you're more likely to feel stuck, to not have the flexibility in life to decide what you want to do and how you want to live your retirement.
Well, demographics has changed, Simon, and people are retiring older nowadays. In the old days, you used to retire at 60, get a watch if you worked in the same company for 40 years. The other people who retired at that age were a lot of the workers who physically their bodies wore out and they didn't live much longer, but we're living much longer in retirement. And Simon, I found a lot of people actually don't just suddenly go to retirement. Some are winding down more slowly, especially those who work in offices or knowledge workers, so that there are some changing trends.
Absolutely. So the hard retirement, the gold watch retirement that you mentioned, that's essentially a thing of the past, because there is a bigger share of the workforce that has those knowledge laptop-based jobs, so to speak, and you can easily do those into your 70s. Your mental decline isn't serious until then. Maybe you want to slow down your hours, but people do just that. They slide into retirement. They take a proactive approach towards reducing the hours. They're still involved. Maybe they do a bit of training at their old job. Maybe they do the occasional consulting gig. Maybe they sit on some sort of board. But more and more people do this. They slowly fizzle out retirement. And you have quite a few people in their early 70s this time around who couldn't really tell you whether they're retired. Because yes, they draw down on their retirement savings, but they occasionally still get a wage or some income in. They feel busier than ever, but they don't know whether they're technically retired. And so we'll see more of this. And of course, that's the people who choose it. There will also be more people who have to remain in work to a certain level to make sure that their money doesn't run out at the end of retirement.
I've seen two streams, people who retire early and others who retire later. Maybe we could quickly talk about those who retire early, the athletes. For years their focus was on their sport, their whole life was around that, they earned good income, and then they were discarded by their teams as younger people came in.
Yeah, and in a sense, you get this experience as an athlete that usually people get in their 60s and 70s when it goes like, you're too old, you're out. And athletes get this in their mid 30s. Which is when lots of careers only really start kicking into gear. So I always find this quite, as an avid soccer fan, I very much see this all the time when they talk about people that are like 5 years younger than I am now, and they talk about them, oh, it's this really old, ancient athlete. It's like, dude, this guy's young, but he can't compete with 20-year-olds who are just in the full flesh of life and so forth. So it's hard to do this. And then, of course, you have to reinvent yourself again in your 30s. Maybe you can stay on as a TV pundit, but there's only so many TV pundits that we need. So many of those athletes, and we know this in Australia, we run into them at ex-athletes at property council events, in the corporate boardrooms. There are plenty of former Olympic level and top NRL and AFL level athletes in there.
I've noticed that I know a couple of my friends who retired, and they went from waking up in the morning with a purpose, with a passion, to now sort of drifting and having difficulty working out, what am I doing with my life? And they seem to have a longer period of this now because we're living much longer. And in fact, there's a lot more women experiencing this, because going back a couple of decades or generations, really, there weren't as many women in the workforce for as long.
Exactly. And so in this traditional setup, he went to work, she stayed at home, she arranged herself at home. She established a network of women who lived the same rough lifestyle in their neighborhood, and that was all sorted. And then so she had it all worked out, and then the retirement of the husband really threw a spanner in the works, because instead of going to the office in the morning, he just like fudged around with her system at the household that was well established. So that's a lot of conflict level. But now you have potentially, if the partners are roughly the same age, you have two people retire at the same age, and then you have two people finding themselves, figuring out who they are. So this is something that you then need to be aware of as a couple, that this is something that you can work quite well to rekindle, who you are as a couple as well, because you do need to do this on an individual level, on a couple level, and also how you fit in the broader family system, because how much involvement with the grandkids would your own kids want or not want? So it's easy to get this wrong. You can be too distant and you can be too close, and you need to navigate all of these things all of a sudden.
I think the other thing you've got to navigate, Simon, is the financial aspects. We mentioned that a couple of times. It seems that retirement is less affordable than it was 40 years ago due to, I guess, large part, the rising costs, but particularly healthcare, now that we're living longer, and most boomers don't have as much in their superannuation as future generations will have, because fixed superannuation wasn't available, it wasn't mandatory when they started working. I know many baby boomers are worried that the money is going to run out before their lives are.
It's a very severe fear of the baby boomer generation. I know that most listeners in Australia to this podcast will live near to a Greek or Italian widow who lives by herself on a quarter-acre block in a house that is easily worth $1 million, probably $1.5 million to $2. But she lives on a humble pension, and she lives a very financially constrained lifestyle. And it needn't be so. So if you have property that you can sell off, you might actually just buy a significantly smaller property. It's less of a hassle to manage, and then live like a queen in retirement. But usually, if we're looking at these cliche, stereotypical grandmother from Greece or Italy that I'm describing, that's not in her nature. So that's a hard balance to get right beforehand, I think, is to understand, do I have a plan of what I would want to have my retirement look like? Do I personally need to own my property, the big family property, or do I want to sell it off while I'm still healthy, buy a smaller property, hand a couple of the dollars that I sell to my kids while I'm still alive as the bank of mom and dad, and go, you know what, you got your money now. I'm willing to spend the rest of the money, but you actually need the money more now that you're in your 40s than if when I die in 20 years and you're in your 60s. You don't need money then as desperately, so to speak. So you want to see the bigger long-term financial picture, and again, do those really awkward things where you have to talk about money and your own mortality with your kids. Yes. Or your parents, depending on who you are in this equation. and it's just awkward. So I know why people don't do it. I can emotionally very, very much understand that.
Now, you spoke a bit earlier on about superannuation funds and policymakers needing to understand these phases as well. Are there any public policy changes that you think could help support people better in each of these retirement phases?
I think it might help if you first and foremost acknowledge that this is a thing. And so if you raise public awareness of this, the hope is that you understand this is a phase. Because we know this when we look at our kids as they grow up. We go, that's just a phase that you're going through. I'm thinking of teenage angst.
Yes.
This is hardly a surprise. We all lived through this, and we are then hopefully, as good parents or grandparents, we're able to guide our kids and grandkids through this. But we don't have too many people that we speak about that are in their 80s that can guide us through retirement. It's just a narrower pool of people that could give us this advice. So I think it would be really helpful to have those voices out in public, because I always want to be a bit constrained in terms of giving out more government. The government should do this. I think to a degree it can be a cop-out of saying it's a broader societal responsibility of us to understand that this is yet another predictable change in the life.
It's also a community obligation, because as one gets older, people seem to be getting lonelier. We need more social interaction, and there used to be local clubs where they used to be called senior citizens clubs. I'm not sure if they're still around, Simon.
I'm the wrong person to ask here. That's not quite my demographic yet. But the idea is, we know that community is extremely helpful, and particularly when we look at widowers and widows. And we mentioned in past recordings that your mental health declines severely once your partner dies, hardly a surprise. But your mental health declines even further if you find yourself in a car-dependent suburb. Because the older you get, the less likely you are to travel frequently in a car by yourself. And so you just stay at home more. You're just lonely for longer stretches of time. And that has severe health impacts. And there's nothing you can do to make this go away. So what you can do, of course, is before it happens, that you move into a walkable community, and while both partners are still alive. And that's really helpful advice, is that the general Australian dream of dying in the family home, don't make it the family home, make it the retirement downsizer home. Die out of that rather than the family home.
Now, I want to just take a moment out from my session with Simon today to remind you that Simon Kuestenmacher is going to be the keynote speaker at Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast on the 3rd to the 7th of May. Now, once a year we get together with a small group of already successful business people, entrepreneurs and investors. And Wealth Retreat's not a property seminar. Wealth Retreat is really, the theme of Wealth Retreat is where are you going to be in 2030, in May 2030, in 5 years' time, in all areas of your life. So it's a holistic seminar. Now, we spend a lot of time talking about property and about tax and about finance, and Simon's going to talk about the future. But I suggest that you go to wealthretreat.com.au and find out about it. But please don't count yourself out. The successes we've seen from people who've come to previous Wealth Retreats has been amazing, because you go in with a whole lot of ideas and plans for the next 5 years, but you go out with a structured plan rather than just ideas. And then I always have a one-on-one implementation session with people afterwards to make sure that they implement that plan. But we've got an amazing faculty of property, tax, business, finance, development and demographic faculty, the best faculty I could put together, and it's an intensive 5 days, but everything's included, including a lot of one-on-one time with the experts. But more than that, building a community. A lot of people that are listening to this, watching this, feel that they're a bit isolated. So the aim of Wealth Retreat is to build a community which we help keep together so that you can talk to others about your successes and failures in business, in property, in money, in entrepreneurship. wealthretreat.com.au. I invite you to join us on the Gold Coast in the beginning of May. Well, baby boomers don't particularly want to go to retirement villages, but all those who I know who have done that, and it's not a nursing home, it's just a different environment where there are lots of facilities and, interestingly, a lot of community facilities. That seems a growing trend here. I know in my suburb of Brighton, which is an ageing population, they've just actually closed down a the Epworth Rehabilitation Hospital, and it's going to be rebuilt as a retirement home by Arcare.
There you
And
go.
similarly, one of the big pubs has been sold, and they're going to be putting retirement homes there as well. But again, this is an affluent demographic that in the future is going to need this.
There's plenty of demand for that.
Yeah.
So if you look at population charts, growth by single year of age over the coming decade, no cohort grows faster than the 70 plus cohort. And so we have roughly from the mid 70s to the mid 80s, this is retirement living. So these are the facilities that you're describing. It's not aged care. Retirement living, just essentially, if you think about a college dorm at an American university where all those
Yeah.
young, drunk, college age people have a good time. You do this, and instead of going to class, you put in a couple of community facilities. That's what retirement living is. But you create this social network of people that share at least this life stage with you, and they will share roughly your income because you will buy into the best thing that you can afford. It can be quite nice because you have so many peers. And this is in a time of your life cycle when you probably need new peers because some of your friends start dying, so it's good to get new friends. And your kids might be a bit busy because they're in their mid 40s at this stage, busy career phases, managing kids and so forth. So it's helpful to not fully rely on your own partner and your own family to provide you with social interactions. We know that the mental health outcomes in retirement living facilities are actually very good. And this
Well,
has to do with community.
clearly, this is going to be a social challenge when we have so many older people. But I think there's also some good times ahead with, first of all, our changing life expectancy and we're living longer and healthier. But there's also technologies that are going to make life a little bit easier as you get into your golden years.
Oh, totally. And we know that if you want to live independently, you can prolong this phase by simple technology. We think about wearable technologies, Apple Watches, or I'm sure there are more monitoring systems that in a very invasive way in your house would detect faults and would automatically detect a medical emergency, and they would then call either an emergency contact or a healthcare provider straight away. I can see this happening, and that would be very, very helpful because we see in towns of Japan where we have many towns with heaps and heaps of elderly people where you just do kind of proxy solutions. There's the idea that you always at nighttime close your kitchen curtains. And if you don't open them in the morning, your neighbors check.
Interesting. Yeah.
It's these simple markers where we don't have anything to do with each other, but if the curtain is closed, we at least get somebody to carry you out of the house. Whatever it is, but it's rough. To talk about those realities. It's kind of bizarre if you just go, somewhere in Japan, this is a small village where this is the case. But if you think about these will be millions of people all around the world living alone, not having these services together. It makes sense that you then regroup as a cohort of single elderly people and create a community anew. And with all the nuisances of living in a community and on all the joys.
Well, I know as Australia's leading demographer, you look at all this and you also work out how this is going to affect businesses, institutions, organisations and government authorities, and you spend a lot of your day talking to companies about this. So if people would like to have you speak to their organisation, and I know you planned the presentation specifically for them. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes so they can have a chat with Fiona and your team to see if it would be appropriate. Do many people talk about things at this level already, or are they?
Very, very much so. So anyone in the property game, be this foreign investors, be this developers, they have their eyes on retirement living. They know that this in relative terms, not in absolute terms, in relative terms, this is the fastest growing segment of the property market in Australia because you push this gigantic baby boomer cohort into that stage of the life cycle. Retirement living is for 65 to 85 year olds, 75 to 85 year olds. And this is the fastest growing demographic in relative terms in Australia. So the opportunities there are endless. And they are very, very keen to understand how do we build the right dwellings? What is the broader function that we need to serve? They're also highly aware of skills shortages, which is my listeners of this podcast will know this by now. This is my main narrative, that Australia run out of workers, and that managing a aged care facility at the end where you need healthcare facilities or retirement living facility, you still need staff, quite a few of them, and that's quite often a bottleneck issue. So you say, okay, even if we get the builders to build it, if we get but where do the groundkeepers come from? Where does the cleaning personnel come from? Where does the receptionist come from? This is not easy, especially if you build in Brighton, or if you build in one of the most desirable destinations of your town. You go that these are expensive suburbs where the relatively low income workforce is far away from.
Yes.
And so why would they do the long commute if they find jobs closer to home? Then I work in my consulting jobs. We quite often come up with things about, is staff housing a solution for you? And quite often in the retirement living space, the providers are now building staff housing because they know otherwise the whole thing breaks down.
Well, if people want to get more of your information, I'll be leaving a link in the show notes. But another real great way of getting to hear you about things before retirement is at Wealth Retreat, which we're going to be holding on the Gold Coast between May 3rd and 7th, and you're the keynote speaker there. And I know every year you've been getting a standing ovation. People are amazed with the information you give. So it's much more in-depth than what we even discuss on the show. So if you're wanting to get information, not just from Simon, but a group of property, finance, tax, development experts, go to wealthretreat.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, and we'd love to spend 5 intensive days helping you plan the next 5 years of your life. We're here with Simon today talking about the next 30 years of your life, but the theme of Wealth Retreat is where you're going to be in April 2020. Actually, April 2030, and that's 5 years' time. Simon, thanks a lot. Look forward to catching up with you again next week.
It's been a pleasure, as always.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades, and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kuestenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.